Hello, and welcome to Living Spark, a project of the Spark of Humanity Network. I'm your host, Danielle O'Hallisey, and today we'll be talking about this somewhat abstract concept, but I think very tangible as we continue our practice, that there is a spark of humanity in each of us, and that we can strengthen not only our own humanity, but that of others by observing that fact. I always like to start the program off with a brief reading from our statement of principle. If you go to sparkofhumanity.net, there is a link that says what we believe. And I find that to be very useful. Like it will help you get on the same page. But the part I wanted to read to this morning, morning for me, afternoon for you back in the East, it goes like this. The insight that there is a spark of humanity in everyone is the foundation of the Spark of Humanity Network. We have discovered that as we connect with and affirm the spark in others, we are claiming our personal sparks and becoming agents of transformation. As we are engaged in life and moving through our experiences in the world, we sometimes notice that our sparks have become defended, distorted, or baffled. However, we have found that they can never be extinguished or corrupted. As we claim our sparks and connect with and affirm the sparks of others, it seems that their sparks are strengthened in our experience. And it seems that the strengthened sparks act to erode the defenses, release the distortions, and clarify the bafflement. The last time we met, and if you've watched any of these in the past, you'll know that I like to do a little segment where I review my previous session and then I expound a little bit, and then I set myself some homework for the next go round. The last time we met, I was talking about the fact that I had reconnected with someone, a street person, who I'd spoken of in an earlier broadcast. I had run into him again, and we'd had quite a good conversation. And he had displayed, I was only there because I'm doing this show, and that's why I do this show, is that it calls me to a level of accountability to remember that this is a practice, not a set of dogma, not something for me to just sit here and rail about, but it reminds me that I have to look for opportunities to practice in the world and inside of myself. And so I'd run into him again, and I didn't have any cash in my pocket. I got a little uncomfortable. I tried to walk quickly by him. Hey, how you doing? And instead, he began to engage me in a real conversation. It wasn't like, oh, give me money kind of thing. It was, and there was no guilt. And I was very much impressed by this man who, the sign he holds up and every sign of how he appears in the world says, I do not have much. I don't have a lot to give. I don't have a lot going for me. And the sign says, I've lost my home. I've lost my job. I've lost my family, and so on. And that he began to talk about the recent fires. Here in Southern California, and I would not have been surprised, and probably I wouldn't have blamed him if he had said something like, oh, all those rich people lost their homes, boo-hoo, I'm in this situation. But instead, he had done nothing but express compassion for the people who were suffering from the fires. He talked about how he had lived in Pasadena near the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he said, no, he had never worked there, but it was a wondrous place, and he always wished he could go in and visit because it just seemed like a city, and he knew that great things were happening there, that things that lead to space exploration were going on in that facility. I will reiterate here that I became aware that this man had more to teach me about compassion than I had to teach him, and that's a good one for us to bear down on a little bit, that sometimes the people that we look we look down on and judge, because that was my first reaction. The first time I saw him, like, yeah, what did you do? Are you a drug addict? Or are you a degenerate? Like my brain goes through all those scripts that I really am embarrassed that I go through them. But I'm sharing it here to make it clear that that my own discomfort becomes deflection immediately. Like I don't want to feel these feelings. I don't want to feel compassion. But when I do it in a condescending way. My first reaction is to say, yeah, gosh, here's a little bit of money. Get on with your day. Oh my, I don't know. I don't say this, but some people would say, God bless you, and I'll pray for you. Like, whatever it is, there's a level of being sanctimonious and of looking down on the person, even during the act of showing some compassion. But here's a guy who clearly has nothing. And he had pointed out, he said, yeah, I lost my home here, but it was an apartment. He said, I owned a house when I lived up there and was kind of part of the community and really feel for those people who lost their homes recently. So, yeah, the guy that I thought was going to be my lesson in slowing down and talking to and listening. And then the same guy who I thought would maybe be my student. Maybe I'll show him what compassion looks like. He was my teacher. And it was such a joy and such a gift to be his student in that moment. Now, the homework I set for myself centered around that interaction because it was I never stopped being uncomfortable during that interaction. And I was headed into the store. I was fiddling in my pockets. Oh my God, I don't have any money to give this guy. And then I had this conversation. And you know how like you're pushing your cart and somebody's over here and you talk to them, but you never turn and look at them. Like, at least I do that sometimes. Like, this is an uncomfortable situation, so I'm going to, with my body language, I'm going to signal that I'm really trying to be over here, and I've got enough time to, just have this conversation with you, but it's got to be kept brief. It's got to be superficial. Yeah, I never turned and looked directly at him. And I was aware of that, but I did focus on the fact that I had this discomfort inside and that was manifesting as impatience. And I overrode it and I allowed myself to stay in the moment, at least, even though I didn't do a great job of it. I was still doing this. Yeah. Doors, I'm buying groceries. I didn't say it out loud, but my body language did. So yeah, that tendency to want to deflect, it's reflected in the statement of principles by saying that we sometimes notice that our sparks have become defended, distorted, or baffled. I see this as an expression of the defendedness of my spark of humanity, that little flicker of light inside of myself that I am aware of, but I'm not all that comfortable. To be honest with you, I'm not all that comfortable right now looking into a camera and talking about this because I don't know who's going to see it. I don't know if anyone's seeing it right now. I only know that it's uncomfortable. And I know that there are a lot of times in my life where my internal discomfort manifests as impatience, deflection. I don't know. From my mother, I learned the habit of deflecting by humor, that having a few like rote little jokes in my pocket that I can say to anyone in any situation. My mom was in her 70s and 80s. She was someone who would say, "Oh, well, I guess I know I'm a real sex symbol, so that's why you wanted to talk to me." Ha ha ha. And people would laugh. She was clearly in her advanced years, and then she would walk away. I don't use that one, but I do deflect through usually self-deprecating humor. I'm a person who will often say something like, uh, well, I'm an idiot. You don't need to listen to me anyway, because I've started to say something that I really believe in, and that has led me to feel vulnerable. And that vulnerability, I've come to understand, it may not be my spark of humanity, but I perceive the spark of humanity in me as being vulnerable. And so I am protective of it. I am deflecting that sense of vulnerability through humor, through self-deprecation, through making sure that people know that I don't really, nothing to see here, folks. Like there's nothing, there's no great knowledge or wisdom to be shared on my part. And if I'm saying something that feels, that resonates with a sense of meaning, you need to know um, that I'm an idiot or that I perceive myself that way. So I'm not asking you to take me seriously, because that would be just too much for me, for you to see my vulnerability, and through seeing that to perhaps connect with my humanity. Yeah, one of my favorite ways of expressing this is that I see my humanity and vulnerability as like like we're looking at a chocolate, like a luscious piece of chocolate, and it's the gooey center in the middle of that piece of chocolate. It's that creamy filling that we bite in there, and we're looking forward to that. And then it's wrapped in a lovely, lovely coating of chocolate, and it's good chocolate. And oh my goodness, my mouth is watering as I say this. Um, and then I've carefully made this chocolate myself, and I've taken great care to not damage either the outer chocolate shell or the delicate center on the inside. But then dipped it in broken glass, and the idea being that if I share it with anyone, they will be either harmed, or they will be very keenly aware that this is not something you actually want to taste. I've protected that which is the best part of me by putting bristles and defenses up around that part of myself. Um, yeah. So the deflection thing, humor, big one. I just happened to watch a television show last night. It's called Hacks. It's wonderful. Anyway, there was an episode where this woman who's a great comedian, a kind of a diva, has been asked by her daughter, who is 5 years sober, to come to her meeting and present her with the 5-year coin. So the daughter has made herself vulnerable to her mother. The mother has come, and it's very uncomfortable for her to be there. You can see it. And right away she picks up one of the snacks off the table and says to her daughter, ironically, this would pair very well with a light Chablis. And of course, how could you be more inappropriate at an AA meeting? And then she presents her daughter with the coin and has a moment where she is vulnerable, where her eyes tear up. And that's immediately followed by her going into a 5-minute long stand-up improvised stand-up routine, where she talks about how terrible of a mother she was, and how difficult of a daughter her daughter was, and no wonder she drinks, and her early experience. And so in other words, the deflection is really pronounced in that episode of that television show, that we have this woman who has come to share a vulnerable moment with her daughter, and who instead takes over and does what she does, which is to be a diva, a hilarious stand-up comic, and to command attention and take it away from her daughter in her daughter's moment. I didn't plan to do this, but I'm going to elaborate a little on that, because it is pretty interesting that the daughter is then called in to read some comments at a roast of her mother. And she's very prickly and says terrible things about her mother. And at the end of saying all those things, The audience is laughing. They stand up and roar, and she walks over to her mother and quietly says, "I've always thought of you as being self-centered, but now I understand it. You are also an addict. You are addicted to the humor. It is an exhilarating feeling to have people laugh at you, and you are another addict." And in that moment, she actually takes down her mother's defenses and does it by expressing a level of compassion that she didn't know was inside of herself. She had shown up to do this thing because it was a roast, and she said some nasty things about her mother. But boy, when she got that laughter, like, now I understand my mother. Not the case with my mother, by the way. She was a lovely woman, but her defense mechanism was humor. And she taught me to use that as one way that I deflect from any sense of vulnerability. And there are so many others. I've seen them on YouTube. There's a thing, I think it's called the Hate Project. There are these ads, Snoop Dogg and some other guy that I don't recognize, that everyone who has seen it would laugh at me because I don't recognize him because he's probably a big star. Anyway, they stand face to face and say, "I hate you because," and it's acting out hatred in a way that is intended to display what's behind our hatred. I hate you because you're different. I hate you because you moved into my neighborhood, that kind of thing. But it's easy, it can be easy to start begin to understand that behind hatred, the defendedness can often be, I feel my own vulnerability. I feel my own humanity. I see people living on the street and they make me uncomfortable. I feel a little guilty because I have more than they do. And after all, I feel so bereft. So I feel like I have so little in the world. That experience of crossing paths with someone that creaks open, I think of it like a giant vault door. There was a bakery, might still be there, a restaurant in Montpelier, Vermont. I haven't visited in a while. That has a safe as one of the things going on in their beautiful little cafe, and they use it as storage or something. But the safe door is open, and that giant iron barrier. I think of the moment of sharing a spark, sharing compassion, sharing vulnerability with someone as perhaps being just pulling that iron gate open just the tiniest amount, just letting some of the light from the outside come in, or letting some of the light or presence of people inside of it, whatever metaphor you want to make of that, letting that come out. We live at a level where we, in order to navigate the world, we do seem to need the ability to protect ourselves and to deflect unwanted attention, deflect criticism, deflect circumstances that will inspire us to be self-critical. And we get stuck there. Isn't that the thing? We get stuck there. We become addicts to our own mode of being in the world. Well, you know me, I'm impatient. Well, you know me, I'm always judgmental, or I don't like these people, or I don't like doing things that make me feel blah, blah, blah. We might just as well, when we say, I don't want to feel uncomfortable, we might, or I don't want to feel impinged upon. I don't want to feel like, that was the wrong word, I'm sure. Infringed upon? I don't want to feel like someone is calling for me to be generous or compassionate or patient. You know me, I'm this. Well, there is kind of at that moment, there is the statement that I am addicted to this form of defense. I am addicted to this form of deflecting or of distorting reality. I am addicted to that approach because in the moment it can make me feel a little bit safer. I've had, as a transgender woman, I've had I was born in 1959. There were a handful of people that had transitioned at that point, and as a very little child, I was already keenly aware that my goal in life was to grow up to be a woman, which was either impossible or perverted according to the culture. And I went through a period in my very early childhood of trying to express that to people. And, after a few times being beaten up by the bullies at school or whatever, I learned to hide very, very well. And some of my mechanisms for hiding became judging others that I saw. If I saw a male person who was effeminate, I judged that person. My judgment was that layer of broken glass over the creamy filling that was wrapped in a delicious chocolate. I learned to become more and more, I don't know, hateful, impatient. Even after going through all the painful vulnerability of transition, when I got to the other side of it, and in more recent years, there has still been a tendency to isolate and avoid others, avoid having a lot of friends anyway, having friends, but not a lot, and having friends that have stood the test of time, I guess. But then to feel incredible self-pity because I feel alone in the world. I'm not. I'm not. And I do have friends, and they're always available to me, and they always let me know that. But my arc has often been I withdraw from people because being around people causes me to feel my spark, and that is felt by dropping my defenses, by feeling vulnerable. And so I don't want to go through that discomfort. And then the other side of that is, okay, I've done what I typically do to defend my humanity, my spark of humanity. And then I feel unseen, unloved, unheard. And I created that circumstance. The interesting thing about living in a community with older people like myself, I'm 65. Around me, that's considered to be fairly young. The average age here in this community is around 80. So the interesting thing is people will see me out taking my walks, which I'm always kicking myself because, because I used to walk 3 miles every morning up and down hills in Burlington. And that was the start of my day. And I took another walk kind of like that later in the day. And people here, every once in a while, someone will say, "You're a real inspiration." Someone I've never seen before will say to me, "You're a real inspiration. I see you out walking, and that gets me walking." Someone walked out the other day, came out of his place with his dog, and I commented on his dog, lovely little poo. That's that deflection level. Like, I want an interaction, but I'm not going to stop, and we're not going to have a real conversation. And he said, "You're late." I thought I'd heard him wrong, and I said, "Oh yeah, you have quite a lovely dog." Like I said, he said, "No, you're late. You usually walk by here much earlier in the morning." And he smiled this most genuine, lovely, lovely smile. And he said, "You think nobody's watching, but I see you." To be seen. Someone told me one time, to be seen is the beginning of being healed. So I know that I'm running out of time, and I want to say I always assign myself some homework. This discussion has been sort of an elaboration on last time's homework and of my addressing it. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot more to be done to see my own vulnerability, watch my own deflections and defenses, my distortions, and continue to, at the very least, to hold myself in the space where I feel vulnerable but I also know I'm not. Nobody's about to hit me. It's not stupid. It's not stupid vulnerability. Anyway, we'll talk some more about that next time. That's 2 weeks from now. I'm your host, Danielle O'Hallisey. Thank you for joining me for Living Spark, and thank you to Orca Media for hosting us.